Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Bett.
Good afternoon.
Will you please state your name for the record?
Joshua Sean Bett.
Mr. Bett, what is your occupation?
I'm currently security with Johnny Depp.
And your current employer is Mr. Depp?
That's correct.
And how long have you been in private security?
Approximately just over 20 years.
Prior to working in private security, what were you doing professionally?
I was with the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department.
And how long were you with the LA County Sheriff's Department?
Just over 14 years.
Over those 14 years, would you please describe for the jury your responsibilities in each position you held with the LA County Sheriff's Department?
Yes, I was assigned to custody division where we handled the intake and outtake of inmates. Then I was assigned to patrol division where I was assigned to crime units where we did calls for service, proactive, reactive arrest. After that, I was assigned to gang details where we focus and saturated in certain areas within our district on gang shootings and things of that nature. Then after that, I was assigned to gang units where I performed search warrants and things of that nature, worked with homicide, worked with special enforcement bureaus to combat a lot of the crime that was taking place in our area.
Over the course of your employment with Mr. Depp, have you seen him consume alcohol?
I have.
How frequently?
It ranged. Sometimes I wouldn't see him drink at all, and there'd be other times he, would have a glass of wine or two.
And based on your observations, how would you describe Mr. Depp's demeanor after drinking alcohol?
His demeanor is the same as if you were talking to him. I would joke around with some of the other security personnel. He's, my terminology would be he's kind of too cool for school. He goes into that kind of Jack Sparrow mode, and he just, he's very likable, whether he drinks or he doesn't drink.
Based on your observations, have you ever seen Mr. Depp appear intoxicated?
Objection leading. Overruled, I'll allow it.
I've seen him slightly intoxicated.
And again, based on your observations, what is Mr. Depp's demeanor like when he appears slightly intoxicated?
It's the same as if he, had a glass of sparkling water. I mean, he's just very low key. He's easy to get along with, and he just seems to me, he handles alcohol a lot better than I would.
And over the course of your employment with Mr. Depp, have you ever seen him consume drugs?
I haven't.
Are you generally aware that Mr. Depp has used drugs over the years?
I am.
And how are you aware of that?
From him.
Do you know who Miss Heard is?
I do.
Who is Miss Heard?
She is Mr. Depp's ex-spouse.
When did you first meet Miss Heard?
It probably would have been around 2011, 12 maybe around 2010. It was some time ago.
And how did you first meet her?
She came over to his Hollywood estate.
And would you please describe for the jury some of your early interactions with Miss Heard?
She was very pleasant, very easy to get along with. She was almost as if she was a next door neighbor, just always had a smile to her face, and no issues at the time. And, I liked her a lot.
In the early days of Mr. Depp and Miss Heard's relationship, did you have an opportunity to observe them together?
I did.
How frequently?
In the early stages, it was kind of on a part-time basis because a lot of times, he was traveling or he was out of town working on films and so forth. But when they were in LA, I saw them quite frequently, which could have been the days that I worked, which varied anywhere between 4, 5, 6 days a week.
After Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard started a romantic relationship, did you become familiar with any of Ms. Heard's family or friends?
I did.
Which ones?
Her sister, Whitney Heard, her good friend, Raquel or Rocky Pennington, another friend, Io Tillett Wright, Miss Pennington's boyfriend at the time, Josh Drew.
And did you have an opportunity to observe Mr. Depp's interactions with Ms. Heard's family and friends?
I did.
And how would you generally describe their interactions?
He was very open and warm to them. He, offered them, whatever they needed. They were constantly coming around the estate. Eventually he let a couple of them live in his penthouses downtown for free. He would let them, a few of them, drive his nice Dodge Challenger in and around town and take on trips.
Did you have an opportunity to observe how Ms. Heard's friends and families treated Mr. Depp?
I did. They were obviously very pleasant to him because, from observing, they were taking advantage of him. So they were being obviously extra nice to the hand that feeds them. And that's just progressed over a period of time.
Were you ever present, Mr. Bett, for any conversations amongst Ms. Heard and her friends?
I was.
Can you describe any particular one that stands out to you?
Objection, Your Honor. Leading calls for hearsay.
All right.
Well, to the extent, Your Honor, we're offering Ms. Heard's statements, it's not hearsay.
All right. Well, if you can lay a foundation to that, let's see. Go.
Do you recall any specific instances, Mr. Bett, where you heard Ms. Heard say something to her friends?
I do.
Okay. Can you describe one of those situations?
Yes. The first one, I was taking her from Mr. Depp's property to her apartment in the south end of the city that I believe Mr. Depp was paying for. She was sitting next to me in the vehicle. She was talking to a girlfriend or a friend where they were talking about another male. And she says to the girlfriend, whoever she was talking to, all men are idiots, you shouldn't trust that guy. And then she turned to me and she said, sorry, Sean, not you, I didn't mean that. And I just shrugged it off like it's not a big deal.
Do you remember approximately when that conversation took place?
I would say probably maybe 2012 or 13 perhaps even a little bit sooner than that. It was a long time ago.
And over the years of Ms. Heard's and Mr. Depp's relationships, did you have an opportunity to observe how the relationship evolved?
I did.
And
Well, I'll just see what the next question is.
Thank you.
That's fine.
did you notice any changes in the relationship between Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard?
Objection, vague, foundation, relevance, and leading.
All right. Well, I'll allow it if you could get a timeline set in there. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. Did you notice any changes in the relationship between Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard after the initial stages of them beginning to engage in a romantic relationship?
I did.
And would you please describe those changes that you observed?
Well, I noticed they went from being that loving, almost like high school couple where they were very giddy towards each other. He was very happy. She was very happy to, they started to argue. They started to argue periodically, and then the arguing started to progress more and more and more. And it was always taking place because, you know, Ms. Heard would start this argument.
Did you ever observe Ms. Heard drink alcohol?
I did.
How often?
It just varied. There would be, you know, some days when I was working that I would see her. There would be other days I didn't see her or she was out of town working. So it just really depended on when she was around. And when she was around, for the most part, you know, she was drinking. You know, sometimes I'd see a glass in her hand and sometimes I'd see her, you know, have 2 glasses if I was in the presence of her and Mr. Depp, obviously.
Based on your observations, did it ever appear that Ms. Heard was intoxicated?
There were times when I went into the penthouse or we were at the Hollywood estate and, based on my training experience in law enforcement, I could tell she was,
Objection, Your Honor.
slightly
That's-
intoxicated.
Excuse me.
That's kind of getting into the realm of expert testimony. He's not a designated expert.
Perhaps we can have him answer the question without any citing to any experience in law enforcement, Mr. Bett?
I'll just sustain the objection. Let's go to the next question.
Okay, understood. Do you recall observing any arguments between Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard?
Several.
Can you tell the jury about one that comes to mind?
There was an incident, for example, I just happened to be on the floor of their penthouse, which is on the top floor of this building. I was outside by the pool area reading a book, and when I was walking back past their door, I could hear shouting. I could hear her voice shouting, at a very high pitch. So I didn't rush in right away or anything. I just kind of stood by the door. He was, speaking with her, and then the voices, the shouting dissipated, and then, there was music playing, and then they started talking. So I kind of just stood by the door briefly, and then I went into another section of the penthouse floor.
Do you recall approximately the time frame of that argument?
As far as the year or how long it lasted?
I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. Bett. The year.
That could have been perhaps 2012, 2013, maybe a little thereafter.
Did Ms. Heard ever confide in you about her relationship with Mr. Depp?
Briefly.
Do you recall her saying anything in particular about her relationship with Mr.
Well,
Depp?
there was a couple occasions. There was one occasion in which they had an argument at his West Hollywood address. Johnny told me, just take her downtown to the penthouse so she can relax and cool off. As we were driving downtown, she was crying. This was at the point when the arguing was taking place quite frequently. And I was telling her, I said, Amber, this can't continue. You guys are either going to kill each other or you're going to be in jail. And, with tears and everything, she says, but I love him and I'm not going to lose him. And I says, but you guys can't keep doing this. So we eventually got to the downtown apartments. She said, thank you. I dropped her off. And then I went back to the West Hollywood address.
What did you mean by, this can't continue when you told Ms. Heard that?
The constant arguing and bickering and so forth, because as I said, it was slowly progressing and, it was just going to turn out bad eventually.
I believe you testified earlier that you observed many arguments between Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard. Do you recall anything that Ms. Heard said to Mr. Depp while they were arguing?
There was an incident because, as I said, the arguing progressed over and over as the years continued. He would text me when I was working saying,
Objection, Your Honor. Calls for hearsay.
All right, I'll sustain that objection if you want to.
Mr. Bett, if you could just focus on what you overheard Ms. Heard say while observing arguments between Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard.
I overheard her saying to him, he's a fat ass, fuck you, Johnny, and you too, Sean, at one time when, she went to throw a water bottle or a plastic cup down the stairs and it bounced kind of in Johnny's direction, but I ended up getting him and we, got out of there as soon as possible.
Did you ever see Ms. Heard throw anything other than a water bottle?
It was a water bottle or a coffee cup. It was something plastic.
Other than a water bottle or a plastic cup, did you ever see Ms. Heard throw anything else?
No, other than what he told me when she threw a broken bottle and sliced his finger.
Sir, I'll sustain the objection. The jury will strike that that testimony, please just answer the question asked, and when there's an objection, do not speak, okay?
All right, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
After observing several arguments between Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard, what happened next?
As far as a time frame, well, as I said, the arguing, when it would continue, we would always, I'd put him in the car and we'd drive back to his West Hollywood address, at which point it just depended on the week or the day or the month. They would reconcile within hours, or it might take a day where he would stay overnight at his West Hollywood address, and then, I would take him back the next day, and, they would reconcile by, talking, and she would have, candles lit, or, a bottle of wine open with glasses, and, within, certain evenings, I'd get a text message from her, asking me to go pick up dinner at local restaurants they frequented.
Did you ever see any violence between Ms. Heard and Mr. Depp?
No.
Other than the occasion when you saw Ms. Heard throw something plastic in Mr. Depp's direction, did you ever see Ms. Heard hit Mr. Depp?
No.
At any point during Ms. Heard's and Mr. Depp's relationship, did you ever see any injuries on Ms. Heard?
No.
How about on Mr. Depp?
Yes.
When did you observe injuries on Mr. Depp?
The first time would have been around 2014, I guess, in which he had his finger was damaged from an incident in Australia.
When else did you see injuries on Mr. Depp?
I saw another injury around, would have been March of 2015. He had a swollen kind of cheekbone eyelid.
Your Honor, if I may please pull up a photograph, exhibit number 146,
All right, just to the witness?
just for the witness, that's
Okay.
correct.
I'm sorry, 146?
Yes, thank you, Your
Okay,
Honor.
thank you.
Mr. Bett, do you recognize this photograph?
I do,
And how do you recognize it?
because I took that picture.
Why did you take this photograph?
Well, we needed it as evidence in case Ms. Heard tried to make allegations towards Mr. Depp. I was emphatic with him, telling him that's a serious mark and we need to photograph it.
I would just move to strike for foundation.
I'll allow that answer, but thank you.
And when did you take this photograph?
It would have been around March of 2015.
Your Honor, we ask that this photograph please be published to the jury and admitted into evidence.
Any objection to 146?
No, Your Honor.
All right, 146 in evidence and be published to the jury. Thank you.
Mr. Bett, what does this photograph show?
It depicts a swollen upper left cheekbone with redness to it.
Thank you. Did you notice any other injuries on Mr. Depp?
On that specific day, no.
Later in time, did you ever notice any other injuries on Mr. Depp?
I did.
Can you please describe what you recall?
It was around December of that same year, 2015. He got into an argument with Miss Heard, and she scratched him, and he had injuries.
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustain the objection, only your observation, sir, what you saw.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Bett, can you please describe the injury that you saw on Mr. Depp?
Yes, he had scratch marks around his nose area, I believe on one of the sides of his face, in the cheek area, and then on his forehead.
And if we could just have, just published to the witness, plaintiff's exhibit number 65.
65.
Okay, thank you.
Do you recognize these photographs?
I do,
And how do you recognize them?
because I took them.
When did you take them?
Mid-December 15th.
And why did you take these photographs?
I took him to show proof that he once again had injuries sustained in an altercation.
Your Honor, we'll move to publish these photographs to the jury and for admittance.
All right, any objection to 65?
No, Your Honor.
All right, 65 in evidence, it can be published.
And Mr. Bett, would you please describe what we're looking at here?
The first picture, there's a laceration on the left side of his nose. It looks like the left upper cheek has a slight bruise to it. And then on his forehead, right above the ridge line, just almost to the center, it looks like there's a red scratch mark above his left eye and to the right.
Do you see that in the same subsequent pictures in page 2?
Okay, page 2, I see a scratch mark, a vertical scratch mark adjacent to his right ear on the right side of his face.
Same question for page 3.
Page 3, there's a scratch mark on the lower right portion of his chin. There's that same scratch mark on the center left side of his nose, and you could see the frontal portion of that bruise that's on the left side under his eye.
Did you ever see any similar injuries on Miss Heard?
None.
Did you ever see any injuries on Miss Heard?
I didn't.
Did Miss Heard ever tell you she was being abused by Mr. Depp?
She didn't.
Did she ever ask you for help?
No.
Did you ever see any evidence that Miss Heard was being abused by Mr. Depp?
I didn't.
Did you see Mr. Depp when you arrived to his West Hollywood home on April 22nd, 2016?
I did.
Did you observe any injuries on Mr. Depp?
I didn't.
In this time frame of April 2016, do you recall Mr. Depp's mother having any health problems?
Yes.
What do you recall about her health problems?
At that time, she was very critical. She had been suffering from cancer for some time, a few years, I believe. And at that stage, she was slowly deteriorating. So it was approximately a month before she passed.
Do you recall when she passed away?
I believe it was around May 20th, 19th.
And how did you learn that she had passed away?
Mr. Depp told me.
And again, based on your observations, how would you describe Mr. Depp's demeanor when he informed you that his mother had passed away?
Well, he just lost his mother, so he was, you could tell he was, very sad, and he was mourning. And so I just left him alone until he needed me for whatever I had to do for him that day.
And to your knowledge, Mr. Bett, when was the next time Mr. Depp saw Miss Heard?
Maybe a month later, sometime in May.
And I'm sorry, was that a month after the birthday dinner on April 21st, 2016?
Objection leading.
I'll sustain as to leading.
To your knowledge, after April 21st, 2016, when did Mr. Depp next see Miss Heard?
In my presence, he would have seen her May 21st.
And was that after Mr. Depp's mother passed away?
Correct, that would have been a day after she passed.
So you were working on May 21st, is that right?
I was.
Did you end up taking Mr. Depp to the penthouses at Eastern Columbia Building?
I did, and Mr. Judge was along with me as well.
And do you remember approximately what time you arrived at the penthouses?
It would have been sometime after 7:30, maybe 7:45, 7:15, around that time frame.
And was that in the evening?
It was.
Did you enter the penthouses with Mr. Depp?
I did, myself and Jerry Judge and Mr. Depp.
And what did you see when you first entered the penthouse?
When we first walked in, on the center island in the kitchen, there were candles lit on the table. There was a couple wine glasses that were empty, and there was a bottle of wine that was open. There was also music playing in the background through the speakers that were in the wall.
Did you see Miss Heard when you first entered the penthouse?
I did.
Did you stay inside the penthouse with Mr. Judge and Mr. Depp?
No, shortly thereafter, Mr. Judge and I exited the penthouse and stood outside the door briefly.
How long would you estimate that you stood outside the door of the penthouse?
It would have been approximately maybe 10 minutes, maybe a little bit more, a little bit less.
And after standing outside the penthouse for 10 minutes, give or take, where did you go next?
We walked down the hallway to penthouse number 5. Penthouse number 5 has 2 doors. There's a main entrance that takes you into the living room. Next to it, around the corner, it's a continuation of the penthouse, which is like a storage area. It also has, it had a couch at the time and a TV for the security personnel. So once we were at the penthouses, we could go in there, have lunch or dinner, or watch a little bit of TV. And then, whenever Mr. Depp or Ms. Heard would leave and I'd have to drive, or the other security personnel, we would get a text, or they would come knock on the door and we would leave.
And when you first arrived to the penthouses with Mr. Depp, based on your observations, was he drinking?
He had some glasses of wine at the meeting he was at with his accountant.
Apologies, Mr. Bett. I meant on May 21st, 2016.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Did you observe Mr. Depp drinking any alcohol that day?
He might have had a glass of wine in the car, but as far as the entire day, I wouldn't have known how much he drank.
Did he appear intoxicated to you when he arrived to the Eastern Columbia Building?
No.
So you went to the storage area of the penthouse area. How long were you there?
We might have been there maybe 10 minutes, 5 minutes. We got something to drink, and then we exited that penthouse I described, or that penthouse storage area.
And where did you go next?
We walked down the hall towards Mr. Depp's penthouse, which would have been penthouse number 3.
And did you stand outside the door, or did you go in?
As we approached the door, we could hear the screaming and shouting from Miss Heard. So I immediately opened up the door, and Mr. Judge and I ran in there.
What do you remember Miss Heard screaming or shouting?
It appeared she was shouting profanities. So once Mr. Judge and I went through the front door, Mr. Depp would have been standing directly in front of us, maybe about 20 feet, because parallel to us walking in or running in, there was a wall. it was the way the kitchen was set up, it was almost like an L shape. So you walk in and then you'd have to make a left. So Mr. Depp would have been standing in front of us and he glanced at us. As soon as Mr. Judge and I rounded the corner, I saw Ms. Heard standing next to her good friend, Raquel Pennington.
And how was Ms. Heard standing? Where were her hands?
Her hands would have been in this motion. Once Mr. Judge and I rounded that corner and she saw both Jerry and I, she had this look of surprise on her face, and then she looked at Mr. Depp and us, and she shouted out loud, "This is the last time you do this to me." At which point Mr. Depp looked at her and said, "What the hell are you talking about?" At that point, Mr. Judge tapped Mr. Depp on the arm and told him, "Boss, let's leave." So we gathered, there was a couple of computer bags that was right on a table, and we exited the front door to penthouse number 3.
Based on your observations, did you have a clear view of Ms. Heard?
I did.
Did you have a clear view of her face?
I did.
Did you observe any injuries on Ms. Heard's face?
I didn't.
Did you see any redness,
I didn't.
swelling?
None.
Was Ms. Heard holding her face?
She wasn't.
So what happened next?
We exited penthouse number 3 and we walked down the hallway. Right when we were getting close to penthouse number 5 door, Mr. Depp says, "I need to get in here and look for something." So I opened up the door for him. We went inside, and that's when I saw Miss Heard's friend, Raquel Pennington's boyfriend, Josh Drew, and another unknown female that I had never seen before. And there was a small dog kind of walking around. Mr. Depp, I believe he said, "Get the fuck out of my apartment." So Mr. Drew nodded his head and basically said, "Okay." The female picked up the dog, and they exited the front door to that penthouse.
What did Mr. Depp do next?
He was walking around the kitchen area, living room area. He might have gone upstairs briefly. I can't remember. I don't know what he was looking for. I didn't ask him. Mr. Judge didn't ask him. Eventually, he didn't find whatever he was looking for, and we exited penthouse number 3.
And while Mr. Depp was in penthouse number 3, did you observe him cause any damage?
No,
Did you observe him cause any damage to any of the penthouses on May 21st, 2016?
no,
Did you see Mr. Depp become violent with anyone while at the penthouses on May 21st, 2016?
Objection leading.
I'll allow it, that's fine.
I didn't.
Mr. Bett, have you ever seen Mr. Depp become violent with Ms. Heard?
I haven't.